Hello, and welcome to my week 1 presentation of EI Competencies, part of our class Symposium. I'm Spencer Barlow, MBA student at Ottawa University, in Dr. Forsyth's class in Emotional Intelligence in the Workplace. We'll be covering the self-awareness and self-regard competencies. Now I'll highlight some takeaways from each that we can use in our work and personal lives. Thank you for choosing to watch this presentation, and here we go. So some EI competency definitions. First, self-awareness. The ability to understand what we are feeling and what caused those feelings. Conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. Also, self-regard. How good we feel about ourselves. It reflects our ability to accept ourselves. Consideration for oneself and self-respect. This, when taken to an extreme, can also be narcissism, which is an extreme interest in oneself and self-centeredness. We'll get back to that later. First, we're going to go into self-awareness. And the first study that I had was on consumer decision-making. So there were 4 separate experiments conducted in this study, and it was testing self-awareness as it relates to preference formation. There were some positive findings about those that are self-aware consumers. They are less inclined to opt for varied choice, and they are also less likely to select compromise options. They know what they want, and they want what they want. So, self-focus makes people more conscious of their attitudes and of their beliefs. Along with self-awareness, it is a focus. But the focus can either be on self or on environment. It cannot be both at the same time. Just as you cannot be in 2 places at one time, you cannot be thinking about yourself and the environment at the same time. Also with self-awareness, there's a differentiation between public and private. Public self-awareness is awareness through the perspective of others or how others view you. And there's private self-awareness, which is an awareness from a more personal perspective. So those that have more of that private self-awareness conform to their own internalized standards and ideas. They try to decrease the discrepancies between what their current behaviors are and what their personal standards are as well. They'll also take their beliefs, values, and filters, combine those elements together to create a unique personal perspective. Self-awareness, as we increase it, will help us to become more fluent in our personal preferences, which also leads to a higher satisfaction in the choices that we make. So takeaway number 1 for self-awareness. Leaders need to know their own values, principles, and beliefs. As a leader, gets to really know what they stand for and what they are, they'll have a clearer vision, which will enable them to express their inward convictions outward. Now we're going to change gears and go into self-regard. So the first study that I had with this was a study of various self-evaluation personality constructs. So the first one was positive self-regard, or PSR. This is when someone is content with themselves in comparison with their own standards. And there's the claim to leadership, which is CTL, which is a subjective conviction that one is called to take charge and lead others. This can also be called narcissism. So self-regard, we're going to take it into a few different elements. There's intellectual self-enhancement. So talking about a high amount of personal self-regard and a high amount of claim to leadership, these people do tend to have an intellectual self-enhancement, as in they believe they are smarter than they really are, which is not a trait that is becoming of anybody. Now, the opposite is true as well. Those that have a low PSR and a low CTL have an intellectual self-derogation, which means they believe that they are dumber than they really are. They don't give themselves enough credit. It's also not a trait that is desirable. What is desirable is a mix of a high PSR and a low CTL, or a low PSR and a high CTL, as this will give more realistic assessment of one's own intellectual capabilities. So the element of interpersonal traits is with self-regard. So if you have a strong CTL, those kind of people show an internal personal behaviors to help attain leadership. Also, if someone has a high personal self-regard, they have a positive attitude toward themselves. They are perceived as friendlier both by themselves and by others. This is because they are content with who they are and so that they can be open to others. Now back to mental health and narcissism. Narcissism may not be as bad as we all might make it out to be. When there is a competition for a claim to leadership, there certainly begins to be a heightened sensitivity when others take charge. So for that person with a strong claim to leadership, it can create some negative emotions when they're not in charge, such as envy and anger. However, these emotions, when used correctly, can help surpass others. This is one of the major points that I've learned this week in our class, is that we can take even negative emotions and use them in positive ways. Now, we're going to step a little bit more into positive self-regard. So a bit further definition I got from another study. So there is a degree to which you accept and value yourself, and also this influences how you behave towards others and how they respond. Positive self-regard is essential if we are to develop a high level of emotional intelligence. We need to look to cultivate a reflective attitude rather than a perfectionist attitude. There are indeed benefits to positive self-regard for leaders. They become emotionally resilient, they have a sense of personal power, their goals are clear, they're happy with themselves, and it is the key to valuing the contributions of others, both their colleagues and those that they lead. So here's another takeaway. Positive self-regard is a balance between simply self-regard and the extreme of narcissism. There's a balance struck between the two. Leaders can benefit from having some competitive traits as well. So that's it, my presentation. Here are the references and the great articles that I was able to read in preparation. So again, I want to thank you for joining me.